Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. In today's video we're going to turn one of my micro builds into a full functional tiny home. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I build these for shorts and I usually don't finish them. But this time I wanted to give it a try, and if you guys have already seen the short, there are chapters and also a timestamp in the description below, so you guys can skip ahead if you want to. So the theme for this build here is plant lovers micro home. So of course I added a lot of plants, but we also don't have a lot of space here because the whole build only takes up 22 tiles in total. So we have a tier 1 micro home here in case you have tiny living. You can make use of all the perks that you get. So as you can see, the build is actually really small, so we don't have a lot of space inside. But it was a pretty fun challenge to build this house, and it's also play tested and fully functional. So if you want to download just the dollhouse build to finish it yourself or play with it or whatever, you can. Of course, as I said before, it's on the gallery just like the finished build. So if you intend to play with this, I would recommend downloading the finished build just because it has walls and the roof, which is kind of necessary. So what I did first here is turn on delete protection, which is one of the features of the BUILDBUY mod, and it's very helpful because as you can see, I moved the build further to the back, and by having delete protection turned on, I just made sure that none of my objects would disappear, which sometimes happens. Usually they get sent to the household inventory or they just disappear into the void. This can also happen when you place new walls like I did here, or even when you apply wall patterns or new flooring. So I usually like to turn on delete protection before change any of these aspects. I'm also going to link the mod in the description below if you want to check it out. It's very useful for builders. But now I want to tell you a bit more about the build itself. So as you can see, it's a rather modern build. We have flat roofs here, which are of course platforms. And some of you guys might have noticed that I said it's a tiny home now and it was a micro home before, and the reason for that is that platforms take up tiles, and even though the interior is the same size as before, the game counts the platforms I used for the roof here and also for the steps as additional tiles. So even though the interior is the same size, the house is considered a tier 2 tiny home now, which also gives you some nice perks. And I could have kept this as a micro home, but I didn't want to use any slanted roofs here because it wasn't really the style I was going for. And so I decided to go one tier up, which is not too bad. As I said before, you still got some very nice perks. So as you can see, I also added a skylight here, and since this build is very small, I felt like having a skylight would be a nice addition because we have some additional natural light, and it actually looks very nice from the inside, which you're gonna see at the end of the video when we're gonna take a tour. So to build the skylight, I didn't use any glass roofs or even windows, just because you can't rotate any windows in the game like I did here, not even with mods. But you can rotate doors, so if you take a closer look at the skylight, you can actually see that I used the same doors as I used here on the first floor. And this way the skylight matches the rest of the windows here. This way I could also add this roof hatch here, which you can't usually have in the game. I tested this with different weather conditions, for example rain. It's a bit glitchy, to be honest, so you can see that there's some raindrops getting through the glass doors, but it's not like there is no roof or anything. The game seems to not know what to do with the doors here. It notices there is something, but just no roof. And this is more of a problem in winter because I playtested this and it looks like there's no protection from snow whatsoever, so it's actually snowing inside. I had one sim in there for playtesting, and as long as she wore her winter clothing there wasn't any problem, but as soon as she changed to like her normal outfit, she was freezing. So I think the problem here is the roof, and you might think it's the door, but you can keep the door open like this because there is an archway in there, and for some reason the game says, oh no, there's an archway, it's covered, no cold inside, so the roof causes your sims to freeze here. But I found a simple solution for the snow and for the cold problem, because for this build I used island living, so it's not an additional pack that you would need or anything, and the pack includes a glass floor called Crystal Clear, and I tend to forget that this floor exists even though it's such a useful and unique item. And I went back to playtesting, and you can actually place 9 of these when you size them down, because our skylight is 3x3 tiles, so you need 9 pieces to cover the whole area. So I didn't include them in the finished build because I really like how the doors look here, and I wanted to include this open hatch, which you can't really close unless you have tool mod, which is another reason against using this with seasons. Also the open door, which is easier to close because if you pick it up it will snap to the wall. As you guys can see, I also tried to continue the color scheme of the interior outside. So our goal here was to have a lot of light wood tones and a lot of white, of course, which I also used for most of the plants. So we have a lot of white flowers here, and most of the plants I used are actually from base game, Snowy Escape, Island Living, and also some other packs. The hanging potted plants you can see here on this side are actually from the Blooming Rooms kit, which is one of the best kits to get if you don't want to spend a lot of money on Sims packs. I would recommend this one here because it's one of my favorites. Lots of nice potted and hanging plants in there. So I recently looked through some custom content because I was looking for potted plants packs because I'm kind of bored by what we have in the game here. I tend to use the same objects over and over, which I try to avoid by trying to get a bit out of my comfort zone, but I think it's also nice to use some objects made by other players and creators. And when I was building this, I actually had a CC pack already installed because I wanted to use it for this build. I ended up not using it because I included so many packs in this that I didn't want to include any CC as well. But I plan on using it for a future build, which will be base game and custom content only. And I wanted to build something Scandinavian, but more cozy and rustic, nothing too modern. And I was looking for custom content. I couldn't really find any furniture that I liked. So if you guys know any creators or any packs that include more Scandinavian looking, more traditional looking furniture, I would highly appreciate it if you could leave a comment. I would also appreciate it if you could leave any feedback concerning this build here, because I showed it to several people and they all told me, well, it's not really good. It doesn't look very well rounded or finished. It's kind of strange looking, but personally I like it. I spend like way too much time on this build making sure that it's functional, and even though people told me it's not good, I wanted to finish it just because I wanted to do something different than my usual builds. And I also tried to make changes according to the suggestions that I got. So this build was actually influenced by other people as well, even though they all told me that they don't like the final result very much. So as you guys can see, this build has actually a rather big garden area in comparison to the interior, and I think it's in line with the theme of a plant-loving sim, because we have a very nice, very green garden area here. I also added some planter boxes later on, so Sims can also do some gardening if you want to. So the house that we have on this lot now is actually not my first draft, because I had to start over like 5 or 6 times, I'm not sure, maybe it was 4 times. But I'm gonna add all my other tries at the end of the video, because I spent like half an hour, maybe a bit more on each of them. And then I realized I don't like this build at all, and I started over. And the problem here is, which I actually thought was a good thing, but it turned out to be a problem. I had the interior basically finished, except for 2 walls, of course, which we had to add later on. And I thought, well, this is gonna be easy. I have the interior all finished, we're just gonna add some walls, make this look good from the outside. But it was actually pretty difficult, especially when I decided that I wanted to keep the house as small as possible, not a micro home, but a tiny home, which I told you before is due to the fact that we used a lot of platforms here, and the stuff I built before had like a mix of gabled roofs, platforms, half gabled roofs, so they were kind of strange. You will see at the end. I'm gonna include them and give you guys some context. So as I said before, this build is intended for 2 sims because we have only 1 double bed, of course. And because the build is so small, I wanted to have some kind of counterbalance here by creating a rather big garden area with lots of seating accommodations, and therefore I added an additional table here in the back, in addition to the one that we have on the patio to the right, which you can see here. Also, spoiler alert, we also have an additional rooftop deck here, which you can see here, which we're gonna finish later on. I also did a parasol here and the deck chair, and your sims can use this ladder here in the back of the house to get up there. So the back of the house was feeling a bit plain, so I added some climbing trellises here, as you can see, and an additional sink for like garden work. So the trellises were a bit too tall, so I replaced them with the shorter ones, which are also from the high school expansion. I think they're like 3 or 4 different sizes for these, and I really like using them. So the windows you see here lead to the bathroom, which I think makes sense because there wasn't much natural light in there. I mean, we have the glass door to the living area, but still I wanted to have some windows. It would also make sense to have windows in the bathroom that you could maybe open from the inside, especially since this is a wet bathroom, so we have the shower and the toilet basically combined in the same room. And I felt like it would make sense to pretend that these windows are kind of openable. But mainly they're just a nice addition, some extra detail on the backside of the house, which was a bit plain. So because I didn't want to add any additional pillars here to support a wooden canopy, I wanted to build something different, and I was looking for rope-like objects in debug, but I couldn't find any. And so I decided to use this object here, which I think is from Island Living. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. I think it's just called debug, and I used 4 of them to build this support structure here, which I think looks interesting. I also feel like it fits the style of this build, so I kept it here. I also used this object here, which is called plot of grass, for some additional detail. Here on the roof deck, I didn't want to use wood here because I think the grass just looks a bit nicer. I also added a parasol here, which I changed later on to a different one because I like the other one a bit better. At this point, the house looked pretty good in my opinion. I was just filling empty spaces, adding some additional details. For example, we have the water hose here, and we added some of these very nice light bulbs here, which I think are from T.O.O.L Lifestyle, which is also a great pack for building more modern houses. I think it fits this style here very well. Also, the lights that I used here, I think they work best if you use them, for example, in a storage unit, or if you group them like I did here in different sizes, so you have a cluster of lights, which looks very nice. And you can also use the dimmer to, of course, dim them down a bit for more ambient lighting, of course. I also decided to plant some trees on the lot because I felt like something was missing, and I think trees are kind of necessary if you have a sim that's into gardening, into plants, and to be honest, the garden area was really hard for me because I wanted something that looks natural but also well kept while not looking too artificial, and I think the garden area fits the aesthetic I was going for. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the garden. But I'm pretty happy how it turned out. I also wanted to have some plants on the roof here, which is also the reason why I choose this grass roof pattern from T.O.O.L Lifestyle, which looks quite nice, but it's a bit flat, and therefore I decided to add some additional plants for some additional structure, so this area won't look as two-dimensional as the standard grass pattern that we have here. I used different plants and debug objects from several packs, including werewolves, snowy escape, but also some objects from base game, for example, the daisies here, and this kind of mossy looking plant, which I like to use as a base for plants, as you can see here. But I also used objects from Island Living. And because I used so many packs in this build, I'm gonna do a base game build soon in the future. As I said before, I plan on using custom content maybe for my next build, but I won't promise anything because I change plans very quickly, and as you guys know, it's not always set in stone that my next video will actually be what I intend to build, and sometimes builds get pushed back, and sometimes if I don't feel like finishing them, or I can finish them, because I also had builds which were not very good, so I didn't finish them. I want to upload them, but for me it's always important that my builds are as good as I can make them for you guys to play with them, but also for myself. And this is also sometimes a bit of a struggle because, as I said before, I also playtest my builds and I want to make sure that every little detail is not perfect, because perfect is almost impossible, but as good as I can make them for myself and you guys, of course. So a lot of the flowers you see here, for example, these here are actually from base game. I feel like they look very nice. I don't use them too often, but they're very good for like using them in the background like I did here with the bushes. I think they blend in quite well. So this object you see here to the left, which looks kind of a metal pot or something, is actually from the Blooming Rooms kit as well. It's also one of the objects I like to use a lot. Maybe too often, but it's very nice with the moss. I also like the swatches that we get, which are kind of metal looking, almost like a patina sometimes. So for this build, it was also a pleasant surprise that I got to use some of the objects from the Greenhouse Haven kit, which is a nice pack, but I think they could have done more, especially since we didn't get a lot of gameplay related objects. I think there's only one object that can be interacted with, and they didn't even include new planter pots, which is just ridiculous in my opinion, because they basically excluded the one item that should have definitely been in the pack. But I also talked about this pack in one of my videos. If you want to watch that, go check out my channel, it's still there. I wasn't too pleased with it, so keep that in mind if you like the pack. It's just my opinion. Also, they included some kind of strange object in the Greenhouse Haven kit, which was a triangular shaped like wooden piece you are supposed to use for the roof on the side. It's kind of hard to describe. I'm not sure what it's called right now. But I really dislike this object because I was pretty upset that they didn't use this opportunity to introduce triangular windows, which I think were included in the new horse ranch expansion pack, which looks nice, but I personally don't have it yet, and I'm pretty sure in this pack was one triangular shaped window or almost triangular shaped window included, which is a pity because they could have taken this opportunity to make the triangular window accessible to more people by offering it in a cheaper pack. But it is what it is, and I think there are some CC triangular shaped windows out there which I want to use for one of my future builds, as I said before, which is probably gonna be an A-frame, Swedish style, Scandinavian style, which is probably one of my favorite build styles. So I'm definitely gonna do another house, maybe a micro, I'm not sure. Anyway, as you guys can see, I'm finishing the interior here. As I said before, we had two walls which were plain, of course, because this house was a dollhouse build before. So before we take a look at the finished build, I wanted to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more videos like this. It really helps me out if you subscribe. Also, if you leave a comment, it's always very much appreciated. So as I said, before we take a look at the finished build, I want to show my various attempts at finishing this build because I thought it might be interesting for some of you, and you can always skip ahead, so here we go. So this was my first draft, as you can see here, with an additional first floor. As you can see, the color scheme is already very similar to the finished build, and I used the same pillars here, as you can see, as well as some of the same windows. And the reason for scrapping this build was basically that I wasn't really satisfied with how it looked because it wasn't modern enough in my opinion. It was also kind of oddly shaped. As you can see here, we have this small nook which is basically necessary for your Sims to get up because I placed a ladder in here since there wasn't a lot of space or any other way to place a ladder. And it's even more cramped now, so I didn't like that, and eventually I scrapped the idea of having a first floor. So this is my second draft. As you can see here, we still have an additional story, and I wanted this to be very bright, so I added two skylights, as you can see here. I feel like this house looked interesting, but it was not very practical. As you can see here, the only way to get up is the ladder again. We have this piece here which is basically not usable, and the huge glass door leading to this extremely small balcony here. And to make this functional I even had to expand the house on one side. As you can see here, it's bigger now, and this area looked very empty, and I felt like cheating because I had to expand the house, which I didn't want to do in the first place. The house also looks very dark and I feel like the lighting is not very good in here, so I also scrapped this one. So the next one is probably the worst one, at least in my opinion. I'm not sure what I was thinking here, but the plan was basically going full greenhouse for the additional floor that we created here, which looks so weird. I think this is my least favorite one of them. So when I built this, having the ladder here in the middle of the room felt like a good idea, but I don't like it now, especially since I had to create an additional small nook upstairs like with the first house that I showed you. And as you guys know, I want my house to look interesting, but this is just weird looking and not in a good way. So I actually really like this one here. I almost used it for the final build. As you can see, some of the windows are already in place, like with our final more modern looking build here. But what I didn't like about this is this roof area here, because it's so slim. But looking at it now, I kind of regret that I didn't finish this one here, because this would actually be a tier 1 micro home. As you can see, it's the same size as our dollhouse build, and we didn't use too many platforms, so it would still qualify as a micro home. I also really like the skylight here, so you might recognize the next one because it's basically a half finished version of a final build. And I'm showing you this because I had a different idea halfway through the build, and I thought it might be a good idea to turn this into a flat or an apartment complex, and I did this by simply stacking our micro home here. Also, I want to build something similar because I kind of like how this looks, but it wasn't really usable at this point, because as you can see, we have no way to access the upper floors because there are no ladders, no staircases, and it would have looked very odd if I placed ladders here. And so I decided to add an elevator here, but I didn't like how it changed the aesthetics of the build, and so I decided to go for a simple tiny home. And now we're gonna take a look at our finished build. That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing. See you guys next time. Peace out.